Hey, what is up, everyone? Now, with having a little bit of time to actually play Season 17 and visit all these different smuggler hideouts, I thought it's a good time to go ahead and rank every smuggler hideout from worst to best. So for this ranking, I'm mostly focusing on how easy is it to sell at these hideouts because in general, they're all pretty much the same, in terms of what you do there. There's nothing like inherently different about each of the hideouts. It's not like you're gonna get something different at each of them or anything like that. So it's mostly gonna be focused on how easy is it to sell at them, as well as I'll give a little bit of bonus points for like the aesthetics of certain ones. So starting out at our sixth spot, we have Smuggler's Bay. Now this one is one of the main ones you're probably visiting right now if you're doing the new voyage because it's one of the two islands you have to visit. Eventually that will change and it'll be somewhere else, but for right now, a lot of you have been experiencing the Smuggler's Bay hideout currently. This one isn't terrible in terms of selling, but it is probably the hardest one to sell at as opposed to everything else. It's mostly just because you have to walk so far up the hill to get to where the turn-in is. And also something to keep in mind is with all these smuggler hideouts, the further you have to go to turn it in, the more likely you're going to be attacked by phantoms as you go along. So the places where it's faster to turn in, you have less to deal with in terms of phantoms. So Smuggler's Bay, I found the most phantoms when I've been selling, and it's definitely been a pain to sell there. It also is difficult for a couple other reasons that some of the other ones don't have to deal with. For one, in terms of parking your ship, the most ideal spot to park your ship is in the middle of the bay, right in the middle all the way to the shore. That's how you can get the closest there where you don't have to go as far. It's definitely the best place to park at if you're trying to sell quickly. The problem with this is you one have a cannon that's aimed right at you from a skeleton, so the skeleton will likely be shooting at you when you're entering and parking. So you have to kind of deal with that, try to take it out, maybe move a little bit to the side. But obviously if you're transporting the new kegs, you're going to be a little bit more antsy parking here as opposed to some of the other islands. You also have the added headache of being boxed in case someone actually does come and attack you. So if a ship starts approaching you, you only have one exit out of that bay. Now you might say, okay, well what if I go park on the side of the island instead? Maybe I have to walk a little bit further, but if it's only like 3 treasures that I'm carrying or whatever it is, then it might not be too bad. Well, then you have the added problem currently where you have skeleton ships that are roaming by, and I've had skeleton ships that will circle the island waiting for you. Now, the skeleton ships right now are pretty easy to take out because they all have the gunpowder kegs on them, but it's still something to be worried about. And overall, I just think this makes Smuggler's Bay the worst of all of them to sell at. Moving on to our fifth spot, we have Crook's Hollow. Now, Crook's Hollow has some of the similar issues to Smuggler's Bay, however, it is a lot faster to turn into it because you can park a lot closer to where the hideout entrance is. The biggest problem with Crook's Hollow is you have to, if you want to get the closest to the hideout turn-in spot, you have to go inside the little bay area where the dock is, and two things you're going to have to deal with there. You have another cannon that's up top that's shooting at you as you're going to try to park there, but then you also are boxed in just like at Smuggler's Bay. Now, it's not as badly boxed in as Smuggler's Bay. I feel like if you can hear or tell that a ship's coming around to you, you can probably get out of there a lot quicker than Smuggler's Bay. However, that is something you have to be concerned about. You have less options in terms of being able to get out. You might get boxed in a little bit easier here. The other thing that I've found the most with Crook's Hollow is that I find this one out of all of them, I end up hitting the shore a lot more than any of the other ones, even Smuggler's Bay. I don't know what it is. Maybe the sandbar is just a little bit further out than I'm used to with the other islands, or maybe I'm just getting greedy and trying to get as close as possible. Who really knows? But I find that those three things combined really make me not like selling at Crook's Hollow. Next, about our fourth spot, we have Plunder Valley. Now, if you saw my guide talking about where to find all these smuggler hideouts before, you might have thought that maybe Plunder Valley would be towards the bottom of this list. However, I found that if you go and park on the side of the island and you go in the other entrance for the hideout, you could pretty easily sell quickly if you're using your grapple gun. Now, I will say the ones we're going to be talking about later, the grapple gun becomes more and more essential in terms of being able to sell quickly. So if you're using the grapple gun, Plunder Valley is a pretty easy one to do. The only thing that I would say is it's kind of hard to know where exactly to park as opposed to some of the other ones. Moving on, let's go ahead and look at Crooked Mast. So Crooked Mast is kind of similar to Plunder Valley where it really relies on you having the grapple gun. However, I feel like Crooked Mast, it's a lot easier to figure out where to park. I usually park on the west side of the island because I find that it's a little bit easier for me to reach it and get into the hideout quicker and all that kind of stuff. But you can basically park on either side, it doesn't really matter, as long as you're not on the north or south side. With this though, once you start using the grapple gun, it makes sailing a lot quicker and faster to do here. Before I started using the grapple gun, I was just kind of like harpooning up there and just kind of going on the tightrope walk to get up there. It took so long to keep doing that back and forth. Starting to use the grapple gun really changes everything and makes the Smuggler's Hideout a lot easier to sell at. It's definitely not as easy as, selling at, say, like the Sovereign Tent or something like that, but it definitely helps a lot. So Crooked Mast, I think, is a pretty easy one to do, especially if you're around that area. The only thing you have to deal with, and one of the reasons why I kind of dropped Crooked Mast a little bit, as well as some of these other ones, is the location of the island in the map. So, as opposed to some of the other ones that we're going to be talking about in a moment, Crooked Mast is kind of more centered on the map, meaning you're going to have a lot more ships around you, passing by and all that kind of stuff. So if you're selling a lot of Smuggler's Loot, you might not want to do it here just because you are likely to run into someone and they're going to kind of roll up and try to attack you. Same with Crook's Hollow and Plunder Valley. I think those are kind of hot spots for people to be sailing around to try to intercept you and steal your stuff. With that said, let's move on to our second spot, which is Old Faithful Isle. Now, this one you might be surprised by just because it's such a big island. However, if you remember from the guide that we made last week, the hideout at Old Faithful Isle is actually really easy to get to because it's basically on the shore. I also gave this a little bit of bonus points just because I think this is my favorite hideout in terms of aesthetics. I think it's really nice looking in there. I feel like if you didn't have to deal with the phantoms popping up in there, it'd be nice to just kind of chill in there and just kind of look at the water and, you're kind of like in this cool little cave and everything. I really like the aesthetics in there. I think it's the best one out of all of these smuggler hideouts that we have. But in terms of being able to sell at, it's pretty easy. Same thing, you're going to need the grapple gun. However, if you just aren't really good using the grapple gun or you don't really have time to waste doing it, this is probably one of the easier ones to just like park your ship close to the shore and then run up and go back and forth. I've done both methods. I definitely think the grapple gun's faster, but both work well for this. Finally, if you've been keeping track, you already know what this number one spot's going to be. It's Crescent Isle, which might be a surprise since right now it's part of the new voyage. So you'd think right now that it's more of a hot area where a lot of people are trying to, be around or sell at or tuck out or whatever. I have not dealt with any issues selling here, and this is probably where I've sold the most amount of my smuggler treasure at. Part of that is just because I'm over in that area, doing like the skeleton chips and that kind of stuff, so that's one of the closer ones to me. But honestly, the biggest reason why I like this one is the location on the map. It's one of the furthest islands to the west that you can get, so you're less likely to see other ships nearby, and they'll be less likely to see you trying to sell there. So you'll be a little bit safer there than, say, with something like Crooked Mast. Another reason I really like it is that both of the turn-in spots are pretty easy to sell at, but I typically go to the west side of the island just to give myself a little bit extra cover. Also, I find it a little bit faster to sell from there as opposed to the east side where you park in the bay part of it. And you can just basically get so close to the hideout entrance where if you're using the grapple gun, you have everything at the front of your ship, you just grab it, go sell, and then, you can do that really quick. I think it's definitely the best hideout in terms of selling at. Might not be in terms of aesthetics, but I do think it looks fine in there. But overall, in terms of actually trying to sell my loot, this is probably my favorite one. I also think something else to consider with these hideouts is where the closest outpost is to them. Because if you're doing something like the skeleton ships or the shipwrecks, you're going to have a mixture of smuggler treasure as well as regular treasure. So you're going to want to be able to sell both of them. So I found that going to Crescent Isle and then being able to go to either Sanctuary Outpost or Port Merrick to sell my other treasure at makes it really fast to kind of do that and kind of still be in the same area. Whereas if you went to something else like, say, Plunder Valley, you have a lot further of a way to sell your non-smuggler treasure to as opposed to something like this. But with that said, that covers my ranking of the smuggler hideouts. I hope you found this video interesting, and let me know your own personal rankings in the comments. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, it'd be great if you hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Bye, y'all.